I recently faced a father's worst nightmare. Two enforcers in a white truck blew through our garage to force my final compliance. And the reason? They said we broke their rules and they needed to protect the community's value. Funny thing is, the only thing that complied that day was them, after my son forced them to back down with our rifle. But let me start from the beginning. My name is Ethan Hayes. On most days, that's a pretty simple job description. It means I make a decent cup of coffee, I tell bad jokes that my son secretly thinks are funny, and I try to keep the lawn from looking like a science experiment. My wife, Clara, is the smart one. She's the chief operating officer of our little family unit. She sees the details I miss, connects the dots I didn't even know were on the page. Our son, Leo, is 13. He's in that strange space between being a kid who needs you for everything and a young man who is starting to figure things out for himself. He's quiet, observant, and has a core of steadiness that sometimes makes me feel like I'm the one who needs to grow up. We live in a good house in a quiet neighborhood where the biggest drama is usually someone's petunias getting trampled by a deer. We don't have a homeowners association. That's not an accident. We chose this place specifically because we believe a man's home is his castle, not a duplex co-owned by a committee of curtain twitchers. We like our privacy. We like our peace. And on that particular Sunday, the peace was just about perfect. The morning sun was slanting through the kitchen window, making little dust motes dance in the air. The smell of coffee was thick and comforting. Clara was at the table scrolling through something on her tablet, a small, knowing smile on her face. That meant she was probably winning an argument with a stranger on the internet. Leo was sprawled on the living room floor, meticulously cleaning a set of gears from one of his model kits. It was the kind of domestic silence that's not empty, but full of unspoken understanding and contentment. I took a sip of my coffee. It was good. Not great, but good. Good enough for a Sunday. I was just thinking about whether I had the energy to finally tackle the squeaky hinge on the back door when the world tilted on its axis. It started as a low rumble, a sound that didn't belong. Not a plane, not a delivery truck. This was a deeper, angrier sound. It grew fast, a crescendo of grinding metal and screaming engine. I put my mug down, my hand steady, but my insides suddenly cold. Clara's head snapped up from her tablet, her eyes wide and locked on mine. Leo froze, a tiny brass gear held between his thumb and forefinger. The sound was coming up our driveway fast. Too fast. There was no time to process, no time to even form a question. There was only the sound and then the impact. It was a noise I'll never forget. Not a crash, but an explosion of wood and metal. The whole house shuddered, a deep, violent jolt that rattled the pictures on the wall and sent my coffee mug skittering across the counter to smash on the floor. It sounded like the world had cracked open right in our garage. For a single, ringing heartbeat, there was absolute silence. The kind of silence that follows a lightning strike right outside your window. Then, the tinkle of falling glass. I was already moving. My brain hadn't caught up, but my body knew. I moved toward the front door, my mind racing through a Rolodex of impossibilities. Drunk driver, medical emergency, a freak accident. None of it made sense. Our driveway is long and curved. You don't accidentally rocket up it at full speed. Clara was right behind me, her hand gripping my arm. Ethan, what was that? Her voice was tight, but not panicked. She's practical even when the world is ending. I don't know, I said, my voice low. Stay here. Both of you. Leo was already on his feet, his face pale, but his eyes clear. He looked at me, then at the door, then back at me. He gave a single, short nod. He understood. I reached the small window beside the front door and peered out. My heart, which had been a cold lump in my stomach, started a slow, heavy drumbeat. A white, beat-to-hell work truck was buried in the front of our house. Not just bumped buried. The garage door was gone. Not dented, not hanging off its tracks. It was simply obliterated. Splintered wood and twisted metal were everywhere. The truck's grill was halfway to where my workbench used to be. Steam or smoke was hissing from under its crumpled hood. The motor still idled, coughing. The wheels looked straight beat up, but it could still move. But it wasn't the truck that made the hair on my arms stand up. It was the two men climbing out. They weren't dazed. They weren't hurt. They were deliberate. One from the driver's side, one from the passenger's. They were big guys, thick in the shoulders and neck, dressed in black t-shirts with big HOA across the chest and a cheap ECA circle patch on the sleeve. One of them slammed his door shut with a grunt, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet. Then he reached back into the truck and pulled out something dark and heavy. A baton. His partner did the same. They stood there for a moment, surveying the damage they'd caused, not with alarm, but with a kind of grim satisfaction. They looked like they were here to do a job. And smashing my garage was just the first step. The big one tapped his baton on our porch rail. Clang, clang. Clock's ticking, haze. I cracked the door chain. The chain stayed tight. The gap was barely an inch. You hit my house with a truck. Final compliance, he said, like it was a parking ticket. We don't belong to you, I said. The man with the shifty eyes read from a clipboard. Brenda Davies. Remove non-compliant items today. Clara called from behind me. Calm as ice. Spell jurisdiction. He blinked. The big one leaned in, breath hot. Open up, or we make a door. My mind was finally catching up to the reality of it. This was no accident. This was an attack. They weren't police, just imposters in bossy shirts. These men, with their matching shirts and their heavy batons, were not here to exchange insurance information. They had a purpose. I could see it in the way they moved, the way they scanned the house. They were looking for a reaction. They were expecting one. I backed away from the window, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked at Clara, and she saw it in my face. The confusion was gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. We were in trouble. The two men started walking toward the front door, their steps heavy and confident on the gravel. They weren't rushing. They were taking their time. It was the walk of men who believe they have all the power, who believe that the people inside the house are helpless. They were wrong. But as they got closer, their intentions became sickeningly clear. This wasn't random. It was deliberate, loud, and destructive. And I had a terrible feeling I knew who sent it. The question was, what were they going to do next now that they were standing on my front porch? The two men stomped onto our porch like they owned it. The bigger one, a guy with a shaved head and a neck as thick as a telephone pole, rapped on the door with the end of his baton. It wasn't a knock. It was a threat. Thump, thump, thump. Homeowner, he barked, his voice a low, gravelly thing that sounded like it was filtered through rocks. Open up. This is a compliance inspection. I didn't answer. I stood in the entryway, my hand held up to keep Clara and Leo back. My mind was a flurry of activity, sorting through the insanity of the moment. Compliance. We weren't part of any association. We had no rules to comply with other than the county ordinances about burning leaves. This was a script, a bad one. The logo on their shirts came into focus through the peephole. Big HOA splashed across the chest with a cheap ECA circle patch on the sleeve. Evergreen Crest Association. Evergreen Crest was the new, high-end development on the other side of the ridge. The one with the golf course and the million-dollar houses and the notoriously aggressive HOA run by a woman named Brenda Davies. We had nothing to do with them. We weren't in their jurisdiction. We have a final notice for violation 7B9, the second man called out. He was leaner, with shifty eyes and a nervous energy the big one lacked. Failure to adhere to approved color palettes, and 14C, unapproved landscaping modifications. He sounded like he was reading from a script he'd barely memorized. It was absurd. It would have been funny if they hadn't just driven a 2-ton truck through my garage. The big one banged the door again, harder this time. The wood shuddered. Open the door, Hayes. We're here for final enforcement. It can be easy or it can be hard. They knew my name. The skinny one held a clipboard with our address and my name in bold. That single fact cut through all the other noise. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a clerical error that sent them to the wrong address. This was personal. This was targeted. My mind flashed back a few months. We'd gotten a letter, a fancy one on thick card stock, from the Evergreen Crest Association. It was a welcome to the neighborhood letter that was less welcoming and more of a warning. It claimed their authority was expanding to include adjacent properties to protect community value. It listed a dozen ridiculous rules. Our rustic wooden mailbox post, unapproved. The small vegetable garden Clara tended near the driveway. Unsanctioned agriculture. The color of our trim, not on the approved list of beiges. I'd laughed it off. I wrote a polite, firm letter back explaining they had no legal authority over our property, citing the county property records and the lack of any covenant on our deed. I sent it by certified mail. I'd expected a nasty letter in return, maybe a passive-aggressive phone call. I never in a million years expected a full-blown physical assault on my home. Ethan, Clara whispered, her voice a low, urgent hum. What do they want? They want to pretend they have power over us, I said, my eyes still glued to the peephole. They want to scare us. It's working, she admitted, though her tone was more angry than afraid. The big man outside shifted his weight. Last chance, Hayes. We have an order to remove the non-compliant structures. He gestured vaguely with his baton toward the side of the house where Clara's garden was. Remove them with batons? Did they think they were going to beat my tomato plants into submission? The whole thing was a clown show, but the clowns were armed and had already proven they were willing to cause serious damage. This wasn't about a mailbox or a garden anymore. This was about dominance. It was about a woman, Brenda Davies, who couldn't stand the word no. I'd heard stories about her, how she'd tried to find a family because their visiting grandchild's bicycle was the wrong color, how she'd sent landscapers to tear out a woman's prize-winning roses because they weren't on the approved floral list. She was a petty tyrant ruling over a tiny kingdom of manicured lawns. And apparently, she was trying to expand her empire. Suddenly, a movement behind me caught my eye. It was Leo. He wasn't cowering. He wasn't crying. He had moved silently to the hall closet and was now walking back toward us. He was wearing his red t-shirt, but he'd pulled on a dark tactical vest over it. It was something I'd gotten him for when we went to the shooting range, a place to hold extra magazines and gear. But today, it looked like armor. And in his hands, held low and pointed safely at the floor, was his rifle. It was an AK pattern rifle, legal, semi-auto, built from a parts kit. It was his pride and joy. He knew it inside and out. He knew the 4 rules of firearms safety, like he knew his own name. But seeing it now, in my living room, in the hands of my 13-year-old son, sent a jolt of ice through my veins. He wasn't playing. He wasn't posturing. He saw a threat to his home, to his family, and he was preparing to stand his ground. He came to a stop a few feet behind me, not saying a word, the rifle held in a perfect low-ready position. He was just there, a silent, steady presence. The men outside couldn't see him, but I knew he was there. And in that moment, the fear I felt began to burn away, replaced by a cold, hard anger. These men had brought this level of threat to my door. They had put my son in a position where he felt he had to pick up a rifle to defend his home. Whatever happened next, they had started it. The man on the porch raised his baton to strike the door again. But I knew I couldn't let this escalate any further. I had to talk to them. I had to get them to leave. But first, I needed to know if I could even call for help. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket, my thumb hovering over the screen to dial 911. And that's when I saw it. No signal. Not one bar. Just an empty triangle and the words, "No service." My heart sank. We were cut off. No service. I said the words out loud, my voice flat. I didn't need to explain the implication. Clara immediately pulled out her own phone. The same empty icon stared back at her. "Mine, too," she said, her brow furrowed in concentration. The circle of our world, which had already shrunk to the walls of our house, now felt like it was constricting even further. The feeling was chilling. It was like being at the bottom of a well. We could see the sky, but we couldn't climb out. We could hear the threats outside, but we couldn't call for anyone to hear us. This wasn't just a couple of thugs in a truck anymore. This was planned, coordinated. The truck ramming the garage wasn't just an act of intimidation. It was a distraction. While we were reeling from the shock, they had isolated us. Someone had cut the phone line. Someone had activated a device to block our cell signals. This was a siege. We moved. Clara slid a wedge under the interior garage door and kicked a rubber doorstop tight. I shoved a hall table against it and dropped the deadbolt. She tossed me the truck fob. Panic button. Now. The horn on our pickup screamed outside. Both men flinched, heads snapping toward the drive. Clara pointed to the side window. Curtain shadow only. We stayed low. A baton wrapped our siding. Tat tat tat. Testing for weak spots. Stay loud, I whispered. She hit the horn again. The house answered back like a heartbeat. Outside, the men were getting impatient. "All right, that's it," the big one yelled. I heard their heavy footsteps move off the porch. I darted back to the window. They were walking toward the side of the house, toward the gaping hole where my garage door used to be. They were going to try to enter through there. My mind went into overdrive. I'm not a soldier. I'm a dad. I sell accounting software. My idea of a high-pressure situation is a quarterly sales meeting. But in that moment, my world simplified into a very clear set of objectives. Keep them out. Keep my family safe. Find help. "Clara," I said, keeping my voice as level as I could. "The main breaker box is in the garage, on the back wall. If they get in there, they could cut the power to the whole house." She nodded, her mind already working. "And the internet cable comes in there too," she added. "No power, no internet, no security cameras." She was always 2 steps ahead. She was right. Our doorbell camera, our Wi-Fi, everything would go dark. Leo, I said, turning to my son. He looked at me, his young face impossibly grim, but his hands were steady on his rifle. I need you to stay with your mom. Watch the back door. If you hear me yell, you lock yourselves in the master bathroom. Understand? He just nodded again. He didn't argue. He didn't ask questions. He trusted me. The weight of that trust was immense. I took a deep breath. Okay, Ethan, think. What do you have? A house. A family to protect. A couple of violent morons in the yard. No way to call for help. It wasn't a great hand. I looked around the living room, my eyes scanning for anything, any advantage. The fireplace poker? Too clumsy. A kitchen knife? Get real. This wasn't a movie. Bringing a knife to a baton fight is a good way to get seriously hurt. My job was to be the barrier, the comm center, to use my head, not my fists. Violence was their language, not mine. If I let them drag me down to that level, I'd lose. And I couldn't afford to lose. Clara suddenly grabbed my arm. Wait, she whispered, her eyes narrowed. She was looking past me out the front window, but not at the men. She was looking down toward the end of our driveway. The mailbox, she said. What about it? I asked, confused. When I got the mail yesterday, the little red flag was loose. I tightened it. It felt solid. Okay. I was not following. Look, she said, pointing. The little red flag on the side of our mailbox was hanging down again, limp and crooked, as if someone had messed with it. But that wasn't what had caught her eye. Tucked into the bushes, right at the base of the mailbox post, was something that didn't belong. It was a small black box, a little bigger than a deck of cards, with a short, stubby antenna pointing up. It had a tiny blinking green light. It wasn't ours. It wasn't from the post office. It was tucked away, meant to be hidden from a casual glance. But Clara doesn't do casual glances. She sees everything. What is that? I breathed. She didn't have to answer. We both knew. It was a cell phone jammer. A portable one, placed there deliberately close to the road, but close enough to our house to blanket us in a bubble of electronic silence. The dead landline was probably just a bonus, a wire cut somewhere down the road. This little black box was the heart of our isolation, and finding it changed everything. It was proof, hard, physical proof of a premeditated crime. This wasn't just assault and property damage anymore. This was a federal offense. And the people who put it there were still in my yard, thinking they held all the cards. But they had made a mistake. They had underestimated my wife. The hook wasn't just the realization that we were cut off. It was the dawning knowledge that our attackers had left a trail, a piece of evidence that could burn their whole operation to the ground. Clara looked from the jammer back to me, and a new kind of light was in her eyes. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. She was a planner, a strategist. Her mind didn't see a problem. It saw a puzzle to be solved. And the first piece of that puzzle was the little black box blinking in the bushes. They're clumsy, she said, her voice barely a whisper. They think they're smart, but they're just bullies. They left evidence. She was right. Bullies rely on fear and overwhelming force. They don't plan for their victims to fight back with their brains. They expect you to cower, to give in. They don't expect you to start documenting their crimes while they're still committing them. They're heading for the garage, I said, pulling her back from the window as the two thugs disappeared around the corner of the house. They'll be inside the walls of the house soon. Let them, she said, and the iciness in her voice surprised me. The doorbell camera is still recording. It's got a battery backup. It saw them arrive. It recorded them threatening us. My own security camera. I'd installed it a year ago, more for package thieves than for armed goons. It had a wide-angle lens. It would have a perfect view of the front porch and a clear audio recording of their demands. That was evidence. But it won't see them inside the garage, I pointed out. And it's only one angle. Then we need more angles, she said simply. Her eyes flicked toward the living room bookshelf. On the top shelf, still in its original box, was a small drone. It was a cheap one, a $100 toy I'd bought for Leo last Christmas. He'd flown it a few times, but mostly it collected dust. It was small, quiet, and had a surprisingly decent little camera on it. No way, Clara, I said. They'll see it. They'll hear it. Not if we're smart about it, she countered. We launch it from the back of the house, from the upstairs window in Leo's room. Fly it high, then bring it around over the trees. They're focused on the garage. They won't be looking up. It was a risky idea, but she was right. It was our only way to get eyes on what they were doing, our only way to collect more proof. I looked at Leo, who had overheard, his eyes lit up. This was something he could do, something other than just standing guard. I can do it, Dad, he said, his voice eager. I know how to fly it. I can keep it quiet. I hesitated for a second. I was sending my son on a mission, a real one with real stakes. But then I looked at his face. He wasn't just a kid anymore. He was part of the defense. He was a member of the team. Okay, I said. Do it. But be careful. Stay away from the window. Use the controller from behind the curtain. And if you hear anything, anything, you drop it and get away from the window. Got it. Got it, he said, a new determination in his voice. He handed the rifle to me, the transfer smooth and practiced. Watch my back, he said. I nodded, my throat tight. Always. Leo cracked his window 2 inches and slid the drone out like a paper boat on a stream. Up, up, he breathed. The rotors ticked a leaf. Outside, shifty eyes glanced up. Leo froze the drone against the bright sky. Cloud camouflage, he whispered. On Clara's screen, the image steadied. Roof line, truck, 2 men. A June bug bounced off the lens. Leo snorted. Airspace violation. I almost laughed. Focus, pilot. He feathered the stick, skimming the maple tops. The big guy scratched his neck and went back to the door. We had eyes. While Leo went upstairs, Clara and I moved into our own quiet rhythm. She went to her laptop. Even with the internet down, the local network was still up. She could access the doorbell camera's live feed, and it saved recordings. It saves to our home hub, not the cloud. So, the files were safe. I've got it, she said after a minute of furious typing. Crystal clear video of the truck. Got their faces when they got out. Got the audio of the whole conversation on the porch. She started saving the files, making copies, protecting the data. It was her battlefield, and she was conquering it. I took up Leo's position, holding the rifle. The weight of it felt alien and heavy in my hands. I'm not a rifle guy. Not really. I believe in the right to own them, and I believe in knowing how to use them safely, but I'd always hoped it would remain a hobby, a skill I'd never need. Holding it now, for real, felt different. It felt like a terrible responsibility. I stood where I could see both the front door and the hallway leading toward the garage. I could hear them now, banging and crashing inside the garage. The sound of my tools being thrown around, the screech of metal being pried. They were trying to force the interior door that led into the house. Then, a new sound. A faint, high-pitched whirring from outside. The drone. I glanced at Clara. She was watching her laptop screen, but now she had a second window open, a live feed from the drone's camera. Leo was a natural. The image was a little shaky, but he had it hovering high above the backyard, peeking over the peak of our roof. We had an eye in the sky. On the screen, we could see it all. The white truck, its nose crumpled into our house. The 2 men, now visible through the massive hole they had created. One was using a crowbar on the interior door. The other was standing guard, baton held at the ready. They were completely exposed, their actions recorded from 2 different angles. They were building our legal case for us, one criminal act at a time. The drone feed was our secret weapon. They were so arrogant, so sure of their power. They were bullies in a fishbowl, and we were recording their every move. The man with the crowbar gave a final, frustrated grunt and threw the tool down. He was failing to breach the door. It was a solid core door, and I had installed a heavy-duty deadbolt myself. They weren't getting through it easily. He pulled out his phone. We watched on the drone's camera as he furiously typed a text message. He was reporting his failure. He was asking for new orders. The situation was at a stalemate. They were stuck outside, and we were trapped inside. But the stalemate wouldn't last. They were frustrated, and frustrated men do stupid things. We had the evidence, but evidence doesn't stop a crowbar. We needed help, and we needed it now. The little black box at the end of the driveway was still blinking, reminding me that the outside world had no idea what was happening here. I had to find a way to break the silence. My mind was racing, searching for a way out of our electronic prison. The jammer blocked cell phones. The landline was cut. The internet was likely next if they got to the breaker box. We were technologically deaf and dumb. Then an image popped into my head. My neighbor Walter. Walter lived 2 houses down. He was a retired electrical engineer, a guy whose idea of a good time was tinkering with circuit boards and talking to people in Finland on a Tuesday morning. He was a ham radio operator, a serious one. His backyard looked like a Cold War listening post with antennas of all shapes and sizes pointing at the sky. At neighborhood barbecues, he'd talk your ear off about ionospheric propagation and single sideband modulation. Most people's eyes would glaze over, but I'd always listened, half fascinated, half amused. He called his radio setup the last voice. His theory being that when all else failed natural disaster, grid down scenario, alien invasion, the ham radio would still work. It didn't rely on cell towers or phone lines. It was just radio waves bouncing off the atmosphere. It was the original wireless network. Walter, I said out loud. Clara looked up from her laptop. Walter? What about him? His radio, I said. He can talk to anyone. He can get a message out. It was a long shot. I'd have to leave the house. I'd have to cross 2 backyards in broad daylight with those 2 goons still on my property. But it was the only shot we had. It's too risky, Ethan, Clara said, her voice tight with worry. They'll see you. I'll go out the back. Stay low along the fence line. Their attention is on the front of the house and the garage. They're not watching the back. I looked at the drone feed. She had Leo maneuvering it slowly, giving us a clear view. The 2 men were agitated, pacing near the truck, waiting for instructions. They kept looking at the front door, not the backyard. It was now or never. I have to try, I said. We can't just sit here and wait for them to break down the door. She held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded. Be careful, she whispered. I handed the rifle back to Leo, who had come back downstairs after getting the drone positioned. His face was a mask of concentration as he piloted the little machine from the safety of the living room. Keep an eye on them, I told him. If they move toward the back of the house, you yell. Loud. I will, Dad. I slipped out the back door, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The air outside was cool, the peaceful Sunday, quiet, now feeling sinister and threatening. I crouched low, using a line of thick hedges as cover. My world shrank to the few feet in front of me. Grass, fence post, the back of my neighbor's shed. I moved as quickly and quietly as I could, my ears straining for any sound of discovery. Every snapped twig, every rustle of leaves sounded like a gunshot. I made it to the edge of my property and peered through the fence slats. The next yard was empty. I slipped through the gate and continued, a suburban ghost moving through a world that had no idea of the drama unfolding just a few hundred feet away. I could hear a dog barking somewhere, a lawnmower starting up in the distance. Normal life. It felt a million miles away. Finally, I reached Walter's backyard. It was exactly as I remembered, a forest of metal poles and wires. In the center of it all was his workshop, a converted garage he called his shack. The door was open. I crept up to it and looked inside. There he was. Walter was a small, wiry man in his late 60s with a halo of white hair and glasses perched on the end of his nose. He was hunched over a bank of glowing radios, headphones on, humming to himself. He was in his element. I tapped on the doorframe. He didn't hear me. I tapped again, harder. He jumped, startled, and spun around in his chair. His eyes went wide when he saw me, crouched and panting in his doorway. Ethan, what in the world? You look like you've seen a ghost. Walter, I said, my voice a harsh whisper. I need your help. It's an emergency. His whole demeanor changed. The hobbyist vanished and the old engineer took over. He pulled off his headphones. What's wrong? You're white as a sheet. I gave him the 30-second version. The truck, the men, the batons, the dead phones, the jammer. As I spoke, his eyes got wider and wider. He wasn't just listening. He was analyzing. Cell jammer. He muttered, nodding. Dirty pool. Federal offense, that is. Okay. He spun back to his radios, his hands flying across the dials and switches with a speed that defied his age. The repeater network is the fastest way. I can hit the county sheriff's dispatch directly through the main tower on Mount Diablo. They monitor this frequency for exactly this reason. Walter volunteers with Ares. This repeater is tied into the county console, so dispatch hears us. He grabbed a microphone. Whiskey November 2nd Golf X-ray calling county dispatch. Do you copy? He spoke with a clipped, professional urgency. Static hissed from the speakers. My stomach clenched. What if it didn't work? What if his antenna was on the fritz? County dispatch. This is Whiskey November 2nd Golf X-ray. Come in, Walter repeated. Then a voice cut through the static, clear and calm. W2NGX. This is dispatch. We read you. What's your traffic? Relief washed over me so powerfully, my knees felt weak. We had broken through the silence. Walter didn't miss a beat. Dispatch. I'm relaying a third-party report of a home invasion in progress. He gave my address. Homeowner reports 2 male suspects armed with batons have intentionally crashed a vehicle into his garage and are attempting to gain entry. Suspects are on site now. The dispatcher's voice came back, sharp and professional. Copy that. W2NGX. Can you confirm weapons? Affirmative, Walter said. Batons. And be advised, The reporting party states all cellular and landline communications at his residence are down. He suspects a jamming device is in use. Copy. Jammer suspected. Units are being dispatched. Tell the homeowner to keep his family secured and not to engage the suspects. ETA is 6 to 8 minutes. 8 minutes. It felt like an eternity. Walter relayed the message to me. I nodded, my mind already racing back to my house, to Clara and Leo. Thank you, Walter, I said, meaning it more than I'd ever meant anything. Don't thank me yet, he said, a grim smile on his face. You just get home safe. I'll stay on the line with them until they're on your doorstep. As I turned to leave, he added, Hey, Ethan, did you get a look at their truck? Any markings? I paused. Just a white work truck. Beat up. 10 to 4. Walter said into the mic, suspect vehicle is a white work truck. He was enjoying this a little too much, but right now, I didn't care. His hobby, his obsession, was our lifeline. Help was on the way. Now I just had to get back to my family and hold on for 8 more minutes. Walter pressed a spare handheld into my palm. Stay on this channel, he said. I clipped it to my belt. Behind me, Walter keyed up again. Dispatch, W2NGX holding homeowner on route back. A second voice crackled in, another ham. This is Doug down on Oak. I can block the south turn with my tractor if deputies want. Copy, citizen, dispatch said. Stand by off the roadway. Walter winked at me. Neighborhood watch, analog edition. I ran. Every fence post was a metronome. 8 minutes felt like 8 miles. The journey back across the yards felt even more perilous than the first trip. Knowing that help was coming made me both more hopeful and more terrified. 8 minutes. So close, yet so far. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. When I finally slipped back through my own rear gate, I saw that something had changed. I crept to the back window and peered in. Clara was still at her laptop, but her face was pale. Leo was no longer looking at the drone feed. He was standing beside her, the rifle held tightly in his hands again, his eyes fixed on the hallway that led to the garage. The rhythmic banging of the crowbar had stopped. I didn't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing. I slipped inside the door, and Clara let out a breath she must have been holding since I left. They're on their way, I whispered. Sheriff, 8 minutes. Relief flickered in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by fresh anxiety. Ethan, look. She pointed to the drone feed on her laptop. The screen showed an angle looking down our long driveway, toward the main road. A new vehicle had just pulled in. It wasn't the sheriff. It was a sleek black luxury SUV, the kind that costs more than my first house. It parked about 50 yards behind the white truck, its tinted windows hiding whoever was inside. It hummed with quiet, expensive power, a stark contrast to the thuggish, beat-up workhorse in my garage. Who's that? I asked, my blood running cold. I don't know, Clara said. It just pulled up. It's just sitting there. My eyes went back to the other drone view, the one Leo had been watching, which showed the two goons. They had noticed the SUV's arrival. They had stopped trying to break down the door and were now standing in the driveway, looking back at the black vehicle as if waiting. The man who had been using the crowbar had his phone out again. He was looking down at it, reading something. On the drone's magnified view, we couldn't read the words, but we could see the screen light up with an incoming message. He read it, then nodded to his partner. A new resolve seemed to settle over them. The shifty one picked up the crowbar again. The big one cracked his knuckles. They were done waiting. The arrival of the SUV had given them new orders. They're going to try again, Leo said, his voice low. He was right. They turned back toward the garage, moving with more purpose, more aggression. Whoever was in that SUV had just poured gasoline on the fire. My mind was spinning. Who was in that car? An accomplice? The boss? It had to be someone in charge. Someone who came to oversee the final stage of their pathetic little operation. And then it clicked. The ECA on their shirts, the Evergreen Crest Association, the ridiculous violations, the attempt to intimidate us into submission. It all pointed to one person. It's her, I said. It has to be Brenda Davies. Clara's eyes widened. The HOA president? She's here. It made a twisted kind of sense. Brenda Davies wasn't the type to delegate completely. She was a micromanager, a control freak. Of course, she would be here, watching from a safe distance, making sure her hired thugs did the job she was paying them for. She was too slick to get her own hands dirty, but she wanted a front row seat. Suddenly, the drone pilot, my 13-year-old son, had an idea. Mom, Leo said, pointing at the screen. The glare from the sun, it's reflecting off his phone. Can you? Clara understood immediately. She began clicking, her fingers a blur on the trackpad, adjusting contrast, increasing exposure, digital zoom. The image of the goon's phone on the drone feed grew larger, grainier. The glare was bad, but Clara tilted and tweaked the image, playing with the light levels like a digital magician. The text message on the screen slowly came into focus. It was short, brutal. 3 words, final compliance. And now, my breath caught in my throat. This was it. The smoking gun. A direct order sent from a person in that black SUV to the men attacking our home. It wasn't just implied anymore. It was written down. It was captured on video. Save it, I hissed. Save that image. Already did, Clara said, her voice grim. Later, the deputies pulled that same text off his phone. Same timestamp. 3 copies saved to 2 different drives. The goons were now working together. One was ramming his shoulder against the interior door, while the other wedged the crowbar into the frame, trying to splinter the wood. The sound was horrible, a splintering, groaning protest from the door that separated my family from them. 6 minutes, maybe less. The sirens felt like they were a world away. Brenda Davies, sitting comfortably in her air-conditioned SUV, had just given the order to escalate. She had no idea she was being watched. She had no idea that every action, every text message, was being recorded by a dusty Christmas present flown by a 13-year-old boy. She thought she was an untouchable queen directing her pawns from on high. But her arrogance had made her sloppy. That text message was a direct link, a chain that connected her in her expensive car to the 2 criminals trying to break into my house. We now had the truck, the men, the jammer, and a direct order from the boss. All we had to do was survive for a few more minutes. The splintering sound from the garage was getting louder. The door was starting to give way. The sound of splintering wood was the only thing I could hear. It was a countdown timer to a confrontation I desperately wanted to avoid. For minutes, maybe 5, my knuckles were white where I gripped the rifle. I wasn't pointing it at the door. It was still held low, the muzzle aimed at the floor, but it was ready. My mind was a whirlwind of terrible possibilities. What happens when the door gives way? What do I do? What do I say? I am not a violent man. I sell accounting software for a living. But the thought of those men getting to Clara and Leo ignited a cold fire in my gut. The core question I'd never had to ask myself was now screaming in my head. How far will a man go to defend his own? And the answer was terrifyingly simple. As far as he has to. I glanced at Leo. His face was pale, but his jaw was set. He was watching the hallway, a silent sentinel. He was just a boy, forced into this position by the ego of a woman in a fancy car. The anger I felt was so pure, so hot, it almost choked me. They're almost through, Clara said, her voice strained. She had abandoned the laptop and was standing beside me now. We were a line, a family, the last line of defense. Leo kept the muzzle low and his finger straight. And then I heard it, faintly at first, a distant siren song. A high-low wail cutting through the Sunday afternoon quiet. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. 1 minute, maybe 2. 6 long minutes had crawled by. The sirens grew louder, closer. The men in the garage must have heard it, too. The assault on the door stopped abruptly. I risked a look at the drone feed on the laptop. The 2 goons had frozen. The big one's face was a mask of confusion and panic. He looked at his partner, who just shrugged, his eyes wide with fear. They weren't paid enough for this. They were bullies, not hardened criminals prepared for a shootout with the police. Their bravado was a thin crust, and it was cracking fast. They dropped their tools and scrambled out of the garage, their movements clumsy and desperate. They ran for their truck. The engine screamed. They backed it out of the splintered opening, tires spitting wood. They weren't thinking about their mission anymore. They were thinking only of escape. Gravel geysered as the truck fishtailed. The first cruiser crested the hill. A deputy bailed out at the turn. A deputy stepped wide and flung a black ribbon across the lane. Stop sticks. The tires hit, hissed, and slumped. The truck groaned to a wobbling halt. The black SUV twitched like it might punch through. A second unit slid in sideways, bumper to bumper, boxing it tight. Don't do it, the deputy yelled. Tinted glass stayed still. My radio crackled from the porch. Walter again, breathless. Nice throw, deputy. The deputy didn't look away. Appreciate it, sir. Hands came out of windows. The fight went out of them like air from a tire. On the other drone feed, we saw the driver of the black SUV react. The vehicle's reverse lights flashed on. Brenda Davies, or whoever was in there, was about to flee the scene. They were all scattering like roaches when the lights come on. But it was too late. The first sheriff's cruiser, lights flashing, sirens screaming, skidded to a halt at the end of my driveway, completely blocking the exit. A second cruiser was right behind it. They had formed a perfect, impromptu roadblock. The white truck, which had just peeled out of my driveway in a spray of gravel, slammed on its brakes, fishtailing to a stop just feet from the lead cruiser's bumper. They were trapped. The black SUV, which had started to back up, froze in place, boxed in. It was over. Two deputies got out of the first car, weapons drawn, but held in a low, ready position. They were professionals, calm, authoritative. "Driver, turn off the engine and put your hands out the window." "Now," one of them yelled, his voice booming through the sudden silence. The doors to the white truck opened slowly, and two sets of hands appeared, raised in surrender. The goons were giving up without a fight. Their day of compliance was over. A third and fourth deputy were now moving up the driveway, their body cameras glowing with small red lights. Everything was being recorded. They moved with a fluid, practiced efficiency that was breathtaking to watch. One pair focused on the men from the truck, ordering them to the ground. The other pair approached the black SUV. I watched, mesmerized on the drone feed. One of the deputies tapped firmly on the tinted driver's side window. "Ma'am, I need you to step out of the vehicle." There was a long pause. Then the door opened. Out stepped a woman in a crisp white pantsuit. She had perfectly styled blonde hair and a face that was a mixture of outrage and disbelief. It was Brenda Davies. Her mask of control was still in place, but it was stretched thin. She looked at the deputies like they were unruly servants who had interrupted her dinner party. "Officer," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "There must be some misunderstanding. These men work for a contractor of mine." The deputy was unmoved. "Ma'am, we've had a report of a serious incident here. I need you to stay right there." While this was happening, I opened my front door. I stepped out onto the porch, leaving the rifle inside. I raised my empty hands to show I was no threat. One of the deputies approaching the house saw me. "Sir, are you the homeowner? Are you Ethan Hayes?" "Yes," I said, my voice hoarse. "My family is inside. We're okay." The relief in his eyes was visible. "All right, sir. Just stay right there for me. We're securing the scene." Securing the scene. The scene of the crime. The crime they thought they could get away with. Cuffs clicked shut around the wrists of the two goons. A deputy bagged their batons and marked them for prints. They were being read their rights. Their faces a mixture of sullen anger and pure fear. They were no longer enforcers. They were just criminals caught red-handed. The deputies were turning their attention to Brenda Davies now, and I knew the next phase was about to begin. The fight wasn't over, but the battle had been won. The scene on my driveway transformed from one of chaos to one of methodical investigation. The lead deputy, a sergeant with a calm demeanor and tired eyes named Evans, approached me on the porch. "Mr. Hayes, can you tell me what happened here?" I started from the beginning. The sound, the crash, the men with batons, their absurd claims about an HOA we didn't belong to. As I spoke, Clara came out and stood beside me. She was holding her laptop. "Sergeant," she said, her voice steady and clear. "It might be easier if we just show you." She turned the laptop around. First, she played the doorbell camera footage. The deputies watched, their expressions hardening as they saw the white truck accelerate up the driveway and plow into our garage. They listened to the audio of the thugs threatening us on the porch, demanding final enforcement. One of the younger deputies let out a low whistle. "That's not an HOA dispute," he muttered. "That's a straight-up assault." Next, Clara switched to the drone footage. "My son was piloting," she explained. The sergeant's eyebrows shot up, but he just nodded. "Smart kid." They watched the aerial view of the two men trying to crowbar their way into our home. They saw them get agitated, waiting for instructions. Then Clara brought up the crown jewel, the screenshot, the zoomed-in, enhanced image of the goon's phone, the text message from Brenda Davies glowing on the screen. Final compliance. And now, Sergeant Evans stared at the image for a long moment. He looked over at Brenda, who was arguing with another deputy, her voice rising in indignation. He looked back at the screen. "A direct order," he said, his voice flat. He had everything he needed. While he coordinated with his team, another deputy walked toward the front of the property. "Hey, Sarge," he called out a minute later. "You're going to want to see this." He was standing by the mailbox, holding up the small black box with the stubby antenna. "Found this tucked in the bushes. Looks like a jammer." Sergeant Evans nodded slowly. "Of course it is." He turned to me. "Using a device like that to block cell signals is a federal crime, Mr. Hayes. On top of everything else." He radioed, "Notify tech crimes and the feds about the jammer." He seemed almost impressed by the sheer audacity of it all. His team was a well-oiled machine. They photographed the jammer. They took custody of Clara's laptop to download the video files. They found the forged violation notices in the front seat of the white truck, all printed on fancy Evergreen Crest Association letterhead. They impounded the truck and the black SUV as evidence. The most satisfying part was watching Brenda Davies's world crumble. As the evidence mounted, her condescending attitude began to dissolve, replaced by a frantic, sputtering panic. She saw the deputy with the jammer. She saw Sergeant Evans looking at the text message on Clara's laptop. She saw her two hired thugs sitting in the back of a squad car. The net was closing, and she knew it. "This is ridiculous," she shrieked, finally losing her composure. "I am the president of the Evergreen Crest Association. I have a right to enforce our community standards." "Ma'am," Sergeant Evans said, his patience clearly gone. "Your community ends at the ridgeline. This property is not under your jurisdiction. And even if it were, driving a truck through a garage and using a signal jammer are not what we call enforcing standards. We call it multiple felonies." He turned to another deputy. "Cuff her." Brenda's jaw dropped. The color drained from her face. "You can't be serious. You're arresting me." The deputy stepped forward, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. The metallic click as he secured her wrists was one of the most satisfying sounds I've ever heard. As they led her toward a squad car, a small silver sedan pulled up behind the roadblock. We later learned Brenda had texted the board to come witness compliance. The timing fit. A man and a woman got out, looking confused. I recognized them from a picture in the local paper. They were other members of the ECA board. They had probably been called by Brenda to witness her triumph. Instead, they arrived just in time to see her being put in the back of a police car. Clara, ever the strategist, walked over to them. "Are you with the HOA?" she asked calmly. The man, looking horrified, nodded numbly. Clara showed him the laptop. She showed him the picture of the text message. "Your president ordered these men to attack my family and my home," she said. The association's letterhead was used on forged documents. The entire board could be held liable for this. The man's face went from shock to terrified. He looked at his fellow board member, who looked like she was about to be sick. The little board revolt happened right there on the side of the road. "She did this without our approval," the man sputtered, pointing at Brenda's car. "This was not a board action. We had no idea." They immediately started cooperating with the deputies, distancing themselves from Brenda as fast as they possibly could. Her little kingdom had collapsed in on itself. Her power, built on fear and intimidation, was an illusion. The moment it was challenged with real authority, it shattered into a million pieces. The tow trucks had arrived to haul away the evidence, and a sense of quiet was finally beginning to settle over our street. The immediate danger was over. Now the long process of cleaning up the mess could begin. In the weeks and months that followed, our lives slowly returned to a version of normal. The legal system, which can often be a slow and frustrating beast, moved with surprising speed in this case. The evidence was just too overwhelming. The video from the doorbell camera and the drone, the text message from Brenda, the forged notices, and the illegal cell jammer. It was a prosecutor's dream. Brenda Davies's high-priced lawyer tried to argue that it was all a misunderstanding, that her final compliance text was simply an instruction to leave a final notice. But the footage of two men trying to break down my door with a crowbar made that argument look as ridiculous as it was. The two goons, facing a mountain of charges, quickly turned on their employer. They confessed everything, detailing how Brenda had hired them, given them the forged notices, and instructed them to make an impression because we had dared to defy her authority. She had told them we were troublemakers who needed to be taught a lesson. The fallout for Evergreen Crest came fast. Faced with a big insurance lawsuit and talk of criminal conspiracy, the board imploded. The two members who showed up that day led a revolt. Brenda Davies was removed in disgrace. The board issued a public apology, and their insurer paid for the damage, plus the fear they put in our home. The story became a local cautionary tale. What happens when a petty tyrant pushes a quiet family too far? Brenda and her two hires pled to aggravated assault, conspiracy, and the jammer charge. They dodged prison but took probation, heavy fines, and felony records that will follow them. For Brenda, the worst penalty was losing her throne. The little empire was gone. For us, life moved forward. A crew tore down the rest of the garage. For a while, a raw hole stared at us every morning. Then, lumber arrived, and the frame rose. New walls, a stronger door. I rewired the runs myself and rebuilt my workbench, one tool at a time. Each screw, each level check, felt like taking the ground back. We weren't only fixing a building, we were rebuilding peace. Leo handled the aftermath with quiet grace. No bragging, no chest beating. He slid back into being 13 with one difference. He had looked at fear and kept his feet. We talked about anger, duty, and the weight that comes with the means to defend. He understood. He held the line, and he was glad he never had to cross it. When the last touch-ups were done and the sawdust settled, I brought out a cedar board I'd carved by hand. Clara and Leo watched as I set 2 posts in concrete at the end of the drive and hung the sign between them. The letters are deep and simple. It doesn't say Hayes. It doesn't list an address. It says, we don't start fights. We finish them. By law, by honor, by family. It isn't a threat. It's a promise. A quiet flag planted where the road meets our home. This is a place of peace, not weakness. When trouble came, we didn't break. A sharp-eyed wife saw the clues. A steady son stood his ground. A dad learned how far he would go and how far he wouldn't. Our street went back to its small noises. Deer still flattened the petunias. But our footing is firmer. We won with resolve, with clear heads, and with the strength that comes from standing together. And every time I turn into the drive and see that cedar sign, I remember the truest thing I learned. A man's castle isn't the walls. It's the family.